This is Podcast Theory.
Hello again, fellow podcaster, and welcome back to Podcast Theory. I'm your host, Jason Sircone. Today, we are going to tackle something in the podcast guesting space that I feel absolutely needs to be addressed. Now, on the last episode, I did a quick promo for the fact that I am going to talk a little bit more about guesting over some of the upcoming episodes, and the reason why is because the guest plays a very pivotal role in most content creation when it comes to podcasts. Now, of course, if you're watching this episode or you're listening, this is solo, so a guest is irrelevant. So let me bring some relevancy to the guest part of this by talking about something that I'm sure as a podcaster, you've probably experienced this, or if you haven't, let me prep you for what you may end up experiencing down the road as your show comes to life, especially when you're developing it for your brand and you start focusing on certain subjects. Inevitably, as you bring your podcast to life, more people are going to be looking to be a part of the experience. They're going to want to join you on your show so they can utilize your stage to connect with your audience, but ultimately create content for themselves. And this content could be real social proof in their world for people to say, wow, they really know what they're talking about. And the more podcasts that people get on as guests, the more social proof they have. And it really lets somebody know that they're in demand and know what they're talking about. Guesting is phenomenal. It's a tremendous way to grow your brand. In fact, I know some people that don't even have their own podcast. They strictly serve audiences of other podcasters by collaborating and bringing their knowledge base to relevant shows. So if you didn't want to have your own podcast, technically you don't need to. You just find other shows that are in your space where you can bring your expertise to center stage and let that audience be impacted by what you have to say. But where we're running into a major problem here, and this is where I feel like the thing I want to address speaks to the guest bookers, the pitchers, the people that are doing it on their own. Podcaster, if you podcasters know this, if you are a podcast, if you are a podcaster and you've been doing this and you've started to receive pitches or presentations from firms, from PR companies, from individuals on their own just looking to get guest opportunities, they mostly suck. I'll put it as bluntly as I possibly can. The majority of pitches that come our way suck. And in most cases, they don't even get looked at. Now, there are a number of levels to the suckiness of this. And I say this slightly tongue-in-cheek, but more so, there is some serious vibes to this because I would love to see this get better. I would love to see some improvement in our space because more than likely, the people that are pitching themselves, or they have somebody else representing them and doing the pitching for them, more than likely have a lot of value to bring to the podcast. But their pitch is so bad, it doesn't give the podcaster anything they can work with so they can decide whether that person is a good fit for the show. Now, I made a comment a while ago that the majority of podcast pitches that we get sent as podcasters read like an obituary. They have this long list of accomplishments and things that have happened over the course of this person's life, both personally and professionally. And it's a lot like what you might see in the newspaper when somebody unfortunately passes away. I don't need to know all of those accomplishments right off the bat. In fact, when you send a pitch like that via email, it looks like a book. And podcasters are now almost conditioned because they've seen so many of these pitches that they've wasted their time on. They're just conditioned to ignore them. If you're not getting to the crux of the whole thing of why you should be there, why it makes sense, and ultimately make that pitch about the podcaster and not about yourself, it's more than likely going to land on the editing room floor and you're not going to get any opportunities to join that show. Now, there's a lot of problems in regards to spraying and praying that we have in this space, meaning that a lot of the pitchers, a lot of the producers, and pitchers is hard to say because it sounds like I'm talking about baseball, but the people that are doing doing the presentations, they're so lost in themselves, and in the same vein, they are sending it off to every podcast within a 100-mile radius. Doesn't matter what that podcast talks about. Doesn't matter how frequently that podcast produces content. Doesn't even matter if the podcast is solo format. They think they belong on it. They think they are the perfect fit for that podcast. Every single time across the board, it's an anomaly. Everybody's a perfect fit for every show. It's bullshit, man. I'm telling you, you have to start thinking about this differently. If you want to be a guest on a podcast, there are a number of ways that you can do this. And the pitch does not have to be some pre-designed template that's got all these accomplishments, because at the end of the day, when you join that show, when you get that booking and you get to be a guest on that show, that's where you're going to get to tell that story. And I'm here to tell you, as a podcaster, what I need to know is not that you have 7 best-selling books or millions of dollars in sales, or your course is the most popular on 4 different continents. Those are all amazing accomplishments. And of course, we're going to talk about those things. But when you reach out to me, what stands out is you telling me what you like about my podcast and why you think this stage is right for you. Why do you feel the value that you have to offer is going to serve me and my audience? Because I'm looking to create great content for my viewers and my listeners. When this podcast goes live, I want my audience to feel that impact. While we're creating it and we're having that one-on-one conversation, I want to engage with a like-minded professional, and I want to share thoughts, ideas, maybe even have a healthy debate. But if you don't align with the message and the mission of my podcast, more than likely, I'm going to say, no, I don't think this fits, because I'm in tune with my audience and what they want to hear right now. And I'm not even responding to these. I'm going to let it keep going because I want to see where it goes. And part of me thinks that it's fake. Like, part of me thinks this is like a phishing scam, because I currently have this. The only thing I can assume, if it's real, is that they're all brothers or cousins, but they all have, every time I get a pitch, it's a new pitch. It's the exact same template with just a couple words. Every other one, my name is, hello, let's blow this up, which is not my name. That's the name of my other podcast. But everything, it's almost word for word with a new name and a new business and then a new list of things they can talk about every freaking time. And none of them align with the content that I am producing for Let's Blow This Up. So part of me thinks that if I respond, it's some kind of phishing scam. Another part of me thinks if I respond, I'm going to miss out on all of this entertainment. But there's that side of me that says, well, if I do respond and this is real, maybe I can help them. I've learned from experience, sometimes people really get offended when you try to help them pitch better. When you help them, when they need more help with presenting or need some help with presenting, they feel like they're doing a great thing already. And I've literally had this happen with, of all things, a PR firm. I was a little blown away by this. The pitch, and it was honestly, it was that pitch where I came up with that obituary analogy. And I got done and I said, wow, this is so much information, and not one iota of that information told me what I needed to know. So I responded and said, thank you for reaching out and showing interest in my podcast. With everything you provided, this sounds like this person's very accomplished, but it doesn't tell me what I need to know. What I need to know is, how is this person going to serve my audience? What kind of value are they going to bring to the show? And what will we be able to talk about so we can create captivating content that people want to listen to that's on theme with my podcast? The literal response was, well, she's in demand. Don't you want her? To which I responded, no, Because even though I just laid out exactly what I needed, you did not provide that to me. I do offer coaching on this if you'd like to talk about this more. And that was, well, whoa, the response I got on that was laced with some swear words that I won't share and divulge here, even though we do swear on this show from time to time. The fact that he was so locked in to what he was doing and not willing to take some help, and even like I wasn't going to charge him thousands of dollars. I was thinking one consulting session would get this turned around because I could share a more easy approach to this that might actually lead to results. But if you're not thinking about the show itself and that host and all the work that they are putting into building great content for their audience, you're not going to really strike a chord with that person or with that host or with that host's team, whoever vets potential guests, because it's not speaking about them. You're not telling them what they need to know. And not going down that path, it's just a waste of everyone's time. If you don't have a strategy, and honestly, you're making too much work for yourself if you don't have the strategy, but you're making too much work for yourself developing this elaborate pitch when all you really need to focus on is having a conversation. That's it. I want to give credit to Mr. Rob Conlon, who is a friend of mine on LinkedIn. He had shared how, I can't remember, I believe it was a client of his, had someone reach out because they saw a clip that they shared on LinkedIn, and they reached out and said, I just had a stop the scroll moment watching this video. I want to commend you on your point of view. And basically, this is excellent because this is where I'm at in the world. These are things that I talk about often. Are you looking for more guests for your show? Because if you are, it would be great to connect and see if we have some things in common so we could make an episode together. That was the pitch, and he did that through a DM, and that led to a guest appearance. It wasn't, hey, I've done this, and this. It wasn't, I'm a perfect fit, which is, without question, my least favorite line. All it was starting a conversation. That's where all of the value lies. That's at the root and the foundation of good podcasts. Conversations. When you connect and you converse and you learn more about that person through that conversation, as a podcaster, you can pretty quickly make a determination that you have found someone that you can collaborate with, and the content that you create together is going to have a major impact on your audience. That's the only way to fly in this space. Get beyond thinking you're perfect for every show. If you are presenting yourself to a podcaster, stop saying that you are a perfect fit for that show, because you can't make that determination. Only the podcaster, him or herself, can make that determination because they are in tune with their audience. They know the type of content they want to create. They'll know if your story is going to get over with that audience or with their audience. If you're trying to put yourself in this position to where you're just assuming you're perfect for every podcast, that is not a good look, because you're not. I'm not. Nobody is perfect for every podcast. You have to think about the podcast first. When you're doing research and making that determination on whether you want to reach out to that podcast or not, which is what you should be doing. You should not be spraying and praying and just firing off your obituary-esque presentation to every podcast that has an email address. You should be checking out that content, looking at the show description, look at some episodes, even listen to some of those episodes. I'm not saying you have to spend hours on this process, but you need to go a little deeper to make sure you're not wasting your time or anybody else's time, because I have to believe it's getting more and more easy for podcasters to just hit delete when they see the BS within the first couple sentences of a pitch. They'll know if you've done some research and you understand what their show is all about. That group that I was telling you about before with the different last names, clearly they haven't done 1 minute of listening to my podcast, or they would know that what I'm doing with that show is talking to other podcasters about how they've used this medium to grow their brand. They've been pitching me doctors. They've been pitching me scientists. They've been pitching me everybody under the sun, except for somebody that I would actually bring onto my show because they have relevant stories and relevant information to share with my audience. As this continues to evolve, as more and more podcasters get into this space, they're going to be looking for great guests to collaborate with. You need to position yourself as that great guest, but not as a great guest on every single show. That's where the message gets lost. But think about it. If you go on a show that has nothing to do with what you do, if you even were to land that booking because somebody's booking whoever, there are podcasts out there that will do that. Yeah, I need people on. Let's join the show. You're hitting an audience where people are just going to scratch their heads wondering what they're listening to because your message doesn't resonate with the content that they're tuning in for. If you're an expert in marketing, but you show up on a pro wrestling podcast talking about marketing, the only people that are really going to resonate with that message are people that like pro wrestling that may listen to that podcast and they work in marketing. Like there's a major disconnect there. But this is the kind of thing that happens when an episode goes out or when a recommendation goes out to be on somebody's podcast and there's no alignment whatsoever. I'll wrap up with a quick story, and this is from the early days of this show, Podcast Theory, was known as Pod Theory, and I believe I've told this story on this podcast before, so if you want to dive back in the archives and search for it, you're more than welcome. Let me know where it was, because I don't remember where it was. But around the 4th of July, and this is when the show first came out, I was doing 5 to 10 minute episodes, and it was just me. Every 30th episode, I would do a guest interview, but for the most part, it was all about just bringing little quick tips and strategies in a 5 to 10 minute podcast, and it was solo. And this prospective podcast guest reached out to me and said, "Hi, Jason, I found your podcast. I wanted to let you know this is a horrible time of year for dogs because all of the fireworks that you're going off on the 4th of July and around that time, they scare our little furry friends and they run under the bed and they hide and they're suffering from all kinds of trauma because of this. I would love to come on your podcast and talk about this with you and your audience. Let me know how I sign up for I don't remember how he wrapped it up. Something to that effect. Like basically he was assuming that he is landing the spot because he knows all of these things about dog trauma and fireworks. Now, believe me, I'm sympathetic. I love dogs. And I understand that is rough. But I don't have a podcast that addresses that issue. So why this gentleman felt like he was the perfect fit for my podcast made zero sense to me. And I replied with a very simple, no, thank you. I'm not talking about that type of content. I wish you luck in your search. Now, if you want to go to that extent, which I have done, if the pitch actually looked relevant and I could tell that it wasn't somebody just firing off a bunch of recommendations to a bunch of different emails, if they didn't fit my criteria, I've made a couple recommendations and connections for them to get them pointed in the right direction. So if I know a podcaster that does talk about where their expertise lies, I can point them to that podcaster and let them know what's going on. And then that podcaster can determine whether they're a good fit for their show. You can do that, and that's good Samaritan work right there. I did that a lot on Podmatch when I've used that community in the past for my own guest bookings and to find people for my show. I did that a lot, and I feel it's a nice touch. It does add some credibility to you and could ultimately let that person know, wow, they're really good and helpful and pointing me in the right direction. But again, if it's just somebody that's firing off a bunch of recommendations, then that completely is unnecessary. It's just work that you're doing for yourself with no real return. And again, the return is doing something nice for somebody. We should all think on that level every day, right? You have to think about the podcaster first. That is the lesson that I am driving home today. Make sure that you are focused on why that show could serve you, but why your information, your story, your expertise is going to serve that audience so everybody wins. That's the biggest moral of the story today. Everybody should win in the podcasting game. The host wins because they are making a connection with a like-minded professional and they're collaborating on content that they can put into their podcast portfolio that could potentially make their show explode. You never know. The episode that you're a guest on could make that podcast take off. And that's great for you as the guest because that's more ears and more eyes hearing your message, seeing your stories being told, whether it's video or audio. The more that show starts to grow, the more powerful your message becomes because it starts to impact more people. And of course, the audience that listens to the show or watches the show, they win as well because they just got to consume some kick-ass content. If your message does not align with other podcasts, that doesn't happen. Nobody wins. You won't get any return. The host might be wondering what the hell is happening. Why did I go down this path? And that's on them because they should be making the right decisions on who they feature on their podcast. And the audience may listen to it and say, this is not for me. This show seems to be taking a turn for the worse. I'm out. And they may never come back. So now the podcaster themselves, they're hit again because they're losing audience members. It's a slow decline if you're not thinking about this on a strategic level. So if you're looking to be a featured podcast guest, get your pitch in line. And one person I highly recommend reaching out to in this space is Lindsay Phillips. She's a guest on Let's Blow This Up with me. You can go and listen to that episode in the archives of Let's Blow This Up. She's big in the content repurposing space, but of course, to have content to repurpose for guests, which and I should say that as a caveat, her specialty is helping guests repurpose content. And she, of course, needs her people to get guest appearances. So having a good pitch or a good presentation and not overcomplicating the process is a key element in all of this. In addition to Lindsay, I'd be happy to provide any type of help if you're looking for ways to grow a strong presentation and ultimately grow your guest appearances because you're presenting yourself in a valuable fashion. So please feel free to reach out to me, Jason at bombtrackmedia.com, and we'll set up some consultation sessions and I can help you get this pointed in the right direction. If you want to be a podcast guest, do it the right way. Present yourself in a way that makes you valuable, and it tells that podcaster that you've taken some time to listen to their show, but ultimately it tells them you are the right person. You are a good fit. You don't have to come out and blatantly say, I'm a perfect fit. But if you present yourself the right way, the podcaster is going to be able to make that determination for himself or herself, and you're going to get a great guest appearance because of it. So that is going to bring today's episode of Podcast Theory to a close. I hope you had a great time. I know I did. Be sure to subscribe to the show. You can catch the live versions on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn every Tuesday and Thursday at 12 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, and the audio version each day goes live around roughly the same time. Just depends on how long it takes me to turn things over. But make sure you're also subscribed and following the show on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss an episode. And until our paths cross again on the very next installment of Podcast Theory, I am Jason Sircone. This has been Podcast Theory. Good talk. I will see you out there.